New on Curiosity Stream. How do you connect a 16th century potato to limitless energy production? Could Napoleon's toothpick have a direct link to a machine that predicts the future? And how can a 1700s conch shell chart a course to humans connecting their brains to the internet? James Burke's visionary series Connections returns for a new generation. Experience all new Connections. With monthly, annual, and bundled plans, find the one that works for you at curiositystream.com.
With Lucky Land Slots, you can get lucky just about anywhere.
Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today to... Has anyone seen the bride and groom?
Sorry, we're here. We were getting lucky in the limo and we lost track of time.
No, Lucky Land Casino, with cash prizes that add up quicker than a guest registry.
In that case, I pronounce you lucky.
Play for free at LuckyLandSlots.com. Daily bonuses are waiting. No purchase necessary. Void where prohibited by law. 18+. Terms and conditions apply. See website for details.
Welcome to Pretty Lies and Alibis. Let's seek the truth and travel the long road to justice together. What you know, Alibis, happy Friday. We made it to the weekend. I hope you guys have some fun stuff planned. I do. Very, very busy all weekend. I'm hoping to get a case update episode out. There have been updates in some of the cases that we follow, but right now I'm just concentrating on getting Friday's testimony out of the way. So either tomorrow or Sunday, I'm going to find time to update on a few things. First, before we get started of day 23, our song fact. He Went to Paris by Jimmy Buffett. Great song. One of my two of my favorites are Pirate Looks at 40, which is my all-time favorite by Jimmy Buffett. But He Went to Paris is a close second. So it was written about a man named Eddie. This was a real person that Jimmy Buffett had met in Chicago at a club called Quiet Night. Actually, a lot of famous singers were launched out of that club or played there, like Bob Marley and the Wailers, Carly Simon. There were just a lot of big names that came through there. But Eddie worked as a custodian and he had one arm. He also could play classical piano. Pretty awesome. So Jimmy Buffett got to know him, and eventually Eddie started telling him stories about fighting in the Spanish Civil War, and he was wounded in that war and went to Paris for treatment. The song ultimately is a combination of stories that Eddie told him about his life, and it's a sad song, but at the same time, it's not, because at the very end, the last line is talking about his life. Some of it's magic, some of it's tragic, but I've had a good life all the way. It's pretty cool. I've seen that on a headstone in LA one time. Bob Dylan says it's one of his favorite songs, which Bob Dylan is an amazing songwriter. So that's quite the compliment. Okay. So a reporter was kicked out of the courtroom today for standing up and saying, I'm a member of the media and I have an objection. So the judge was like, you better sit down. And he was like, I object. So he got tossed. A lot of people online that were in the courtroom when this happened speculate it's because Rita Newcomb, who is the mother of Angela and was the last witness of the day, opted out of being recorded audio or video. So she has that right under the ruling that the judge made. So he was tossed. I don't know if he got banned, but I guess we'll see Monday. I have to give a thank you to Eric for passing me these notes. He was in the courtroom today when Rita testified and would not really be able to give you as detailed of a recap if he didn't send those my way. So appreciate it. All right. So first, we're going to get into the first witness of the day. She opted in for audio only, and it's Randa Hughes, who is Chris Newcomb's partner. Chris, if you remember, testified yesterday, probably my favorite witness by far in this trial, who was very good for the defense. But she's his partner in life. And she said that at the moment, Angela's mom, Rita, and Rita's mother are living with them because their house burned down in November of last year. She also said that Chris didn't want her to meet Angela, and she actually didn't meet Angela until she was pregnant with their first child. So just a reminder, if I say Chris, I'm not talking about Chris Sr. or little Chris. In this, I'm talking about Chris Newcomb, Angela's half-brother, who is 20 years younger and really grew up with the boys, but was really close with George. She had been to the Peterson Road a few times. She would go hang out when Chris was helping them build things around there. And she finally met the Wagners at a Thanksgiving dinner. At that one, Hannah Mae was there, But it wasn't long after that Thanksgiving dinner that her and Jake broke up. And that was the only time she ever met Hannah Mae. She did meet Frankie once at trade days. That sounds really cool. Just people bring stuff they don't want. Either you trade it or sell it or something. I looked it up online. It looks huge. Looks like a big event up there. She said that they would visit the Wagners and the Wagners would come to their house. And it was maybe a couple of times a month that they would get together. She said her and Chris and George would go fishing, and she really didn't hang out with Jake too much. She did see Jake and George with their hair dyed, and Jake told her he dyed his hair to look like Norman Reedus. And she said she told him he was far from that. And also, she said that Angela was the one that dyed her hair. I mean, why not? I'm not surprised. She probably brushed it for him too. Knowing they dyed their hair caused her to worry, though. She said, why change your appearance and then something like this happened, meaning the murders? George had asked Chris if he knew of anyone that had a Glock, and Chris found one on that Facebook group. We heard that story with Chris where George wanted him to meet the guy because he had done the talking with him, but George met everybody there. She did not like Angela. She said she was very judgmental, and she said Angela would judge people, and she had more skeletons in her closet than anyone, and said she was very conniving. And that's a really appropriate word from what we know about Angela is conniving. Angela was close to her grandkids, as we know, and Bovine slept with her. From the time Branda was around, Tabitha was already gone, but she did meet Tabitha after the murders. She said that Jake and George seemed close, and she also knew of those family meetings that they would have. Angela would mention them, and Chris and Rita would also talk about those family meetings. She didn't see Billy often. Anytime they were at the Peterson Roadhouse, he just wasn't there. Then she's asked, of course, about Jake and George's favorite movie and TV shows, which, of course, is Boondock Saints and The Walking Dead. She also knew Beth Ann, which is Jake's Alaska wife. She had a lot of interactions with her because they live next door. So one thing, I have found some videos of her online that she has done since the divorce with Jake. And yes, they are officially divorced. I did not know this. She was raised in a Mennonite community, and she does have that Dutch accent. You can Google Beth Ann Wagner on YouTube and find some of her videos. So she, let's see. Y'all know me. I get lost. So Randa was interviewed by BCI, and they shared with her and Chris some information that they had collected. And at the time, the Wagners were still living next door to them. So she was pretty worried. After the Wagners were arrested, Jake, George, and Angela called and asked her and Chris to try to get custody of Bovine and Sophia. There were lots of objections to this, but finally she kind of got to answer. It was George and Angela that called them frequently. So her husband, Chris, paid for an attorney to try to get custody of the two kids. So there's an objection and then a sidebar. They stopped seeking custody after the charges. She said once they met Tabitha, they thought she deserved to be with her son, and she was nothing like what she had been described as to them by the Wagners. And she said Sophie was happy where she was, and she had already lost enough. Well, Parker objects to that. So they stopped after Jake confessed, they just didn't pursue the custody anymore. George still had worries about Tabitha getting Vine, but Angela, Jake, and George asked them also not to talk to BCI. She knew Rita had been charged with the forgery. If you remember the very beginning of the case, both the moms, Rita and Frederica Wagner, were charged. One day they were sitting outside with Rita, and she started crying. And then they asked her what's wrong, and she tells them that Angela told her to lie for her. So they advised her to call her lawyer and tell the truth in court. So after the murders, Chris's partner made a comment to her mother that Jake and George had changed their hair color. It stood out to her because she knew it was super close to the times of the murders. She was with Chris when he found out that Jake had confessed, and Chris expressed yesterday how upset he was. He was very upset. She said he was hitting and punching things, and has to be a moment though, because if my family were accused of something like this, I would defend them until I was blue in the face. So I guess, a lot of emotions at one time coming out, feeling like you've been played and embarrassed that you've now defended mass murderers essentially for a couple of years now. It'd been 2 years, since the murders, over 2 years. George was very protective of Jake, and she said with Angela, if things weren't going her way, she would make them go her way. She was very persistent. Either you gave in to her or you had to walk away. Rita was not allowed to watch Bolvine or Sophia at her house. She had to go over to the Wagners if she wanted to watch them. So on cross-exam, after the Wagners were arrested, they moved into the house that the Wagners lived in when they moved back from Alaska, which belonged to Angela's dad. She said she would go fishing with Chris and George, and they didn't like really hanging out with Jake at all. They mentioned the pink bedroom with My Little Pony again, and she said, yeah, but Sophia was sleeping in that room with him. So I don't know why Parker is talking about this My Little Pony bedroom. It may come in later, but it kind of makes sense if Sophia's in there with him, that he might decorate the room with what makes her happy. But hey, if My Little Pony makes him happy, I'm not judging. We all got things we like, right? She said Jake was a homebody. George was the opposite. Nash makes a point to have her say Jake and George weren't trying to conceal their hair. And Nash mentioned that Nash mentioned that Jake had a fascination with Norman Reedus. And he asked if she watched The Walking Dead, and she said yes. And he says, how do you kill a zombie? And she said, you shoot him in the head. All this zombie talks like cross between Valo Daybell and this, and my head's hurting. She said she was president when BCI would come talk to Chris, and Nash mentions the Glock and asked if the Glock was green in color, and she said it was. He asked about talking to George when they were in Alaska, and Nash says, were you aware those calls were being recorded? And she said eventually she was. It's not clear when he's talking about here, because they jump from Alaska calls to calls about George asking them to get custody. So it wasn't clear. Was he talking about the Alaska? Because that was bugged too, I'm sure. So that just was never clarified. Chris wasn't happy with the BCI agents coming to his house. He just didn't believe the Wagners were guilty. And it's not clear, it wasn't clear to him that they were guilty. She said Chris would speak badly about BCI agents coming to his house on the phone to George as well, when George would call him from the jail. She said George loved Vine very much, and he was his world. And Nash said after the arrest, George asked them to gain custody. He asked if she knew Tabitha lived with someone who committed a sex offense, and she said they had never talked about it. Nash says in George reaching out to her to take Bolvine, that was a loving thing to do. They had a case in juvenile court, and Chris had to go to court to get custody, but Tabitha was there. And the court ultimately decided she would get custody. And one thing, too, that kind of went against them getting custody, Chris did not have a job at the time. He was doing the trading like he kind of did in between jobs, and even when he had a job. So she talked to George a bit while he was in jail also, and she told him that Tabitha was a good person. And Nash says after that conversation, it kind of eased George's mind a bit about Vine being with his mommy. So Nash asks about George talking about moving out of the Wagner home. There was an objection which was sustained. He asks about Rita saying, obviously she was indicted in the case, and she says for forgery. She also said the notary seal that was used on the forged custody documents was actually an old one of Angela's father. And she confirms that Angela had asked Rita to lie and say she did it. He asked about Jake's wife again, Beth Ann, and she said she talked to her a few times, but her impression was that she was really super weird. And this girl said that she thought Beth Ann was dyeing her hair to kind of look like her. And she asked why she would marry someone with the accusations against them that Jake had. And Beth Ann said she didn't believe the accusations. Chris and George talked frequently while he was in jail up until about a month ago. She said Jake and George were total opposites. George was very adventurous. On the other hand, Jake was a homebody and didn't really care to socialize with people too much. So he stayed home with mommy a whole lot. On redirect, George didn't tell them where they were in Alaska and that Jake got married. Um, George did not like Beth Ann at all. When she asked about Beth Ann being with Jake, Beth Ann said she did a background check on him too, and again, didn't believe the accusations. She talks about the past tense of Chris saying George was like a brother. She said Chris is really just trying to get some closure, and the calls aren't frequent now with George, and that's Chris's choice. So that kind of wrapped up her testimony. I'm really thankful that she chose to opt in with audio. It would be super helpful if somebody could just opt out of video, but not audio, because I don't think that audio is it's not as revealing, especially if you're nervous or emotional, but oh well. So next up was Brian White with BCI. He's been on several times. My little thing I just couldn't get my people that were testifying up today. And he was at all the search warrants. And this testimony was a little confusing because they're leaving things very open. And to me, I feel like if they're going to talk about what they did at a search warrant and here's what they found, let's go ahead and wrap it up with one testimony instead of leaving it open ended. But we're going to run through this real quick. So after the search warrants, meaning the trailers and all that was finished, they decided to go back to Peterson Road to do a very extensive search. So they went June 14th and 15th of 2017. And at that point, the new owner had taken custody of the house, but they said he was super cooperative, allowed them access to the property anytime they needed it, and gave permission for them to search the property or do whatever they had to do. So the other search warrant, they didn't dig up the ground or use sifters or anything like that. So this time they brought equipment and the manpower to excavate around the barn area. They called this the new barn, and they wanted to see just if there was anything because they had noticed that there was some construction that started on this barn after the murders, shortly before or right after the murders. So they used bobcats, excavators, and ground penetrating radar. And at this point, there was no way to keep the search quiet. They had a ton of police vehicles there marked, and they had all this equipment on the property. So somebody would get a scoop of dirt in the bobcat, bring it to the other agents who were sifting to look for evidence. And they used 5-gallon buckets at a time. And it took a very long time to do this. So Matt White with BCI Ballistics, the epic beard dude, he was on site for this search, and he was there to help with firearm evidence and decide what was pertinent to the investigation and what was not. So they collected some 45 shell casings and 22s, and that was it. Like, that was all he testified to. He didn't say if they were a match, although we've kind of already been through this, and we know they found matches on the property. So I know they have to go chronologically, but you could have just said, yeah, they matched or they didn't. So on YouTube, if you're watching, the first two pictures to the left were on a Facebook post by Angela. The Defiance Farms Facebook page is actually still up, y'all. If you scroll more to the bottom, it's when Angela and then we're the owners. You can see a couple of shots of the kids kind of from behind. And then the far right pictures are photos they found on Jake's iPhone taken June 6, 2016. The Facebook post by Angela was June 3rd. So you're just looking at a little more than a month and a half, if that, after the murders, that they really fast and furious started rebuilding this barn. And so next on the stand was Julia. I get her name every time. It's Eva Slage. She did some work with the new barn, and the time frame of the barn's construction was suspicious to investigators. And it seemed around the time or shortly after the homicides, the barn appeared more finished. And later down the road, they were given information that took them back to the barn. That's going to come from Jake's confession, his proffer. So Angela went to admit a presentation that was made of the barn area, and they actually went to the barn after this trial had started to get photos to add to this presentation, and there was a sidebar. So they found the on that barn photo, the 2 barn photos posted on Angela's Facebook for Defiance Farms, her caption on that, by the way, was, "Well, almost done. Can't wait to be able to move our animals into the new barn." So they also got Facebook returns for everyone except Chris Sr. and Billy. And so they go through the unfriending or blocking of Facebook accounts. And so if you're watching on YouTube, and I will put a link in the description to these photos so you can look at them, the arrows in red, wherever that arrow is pointing from. So if it's pointing from Angela to Frankie and the arrow is pointing towards Frankie, that means that she blocked him. Whoever the arrow is pointing to, that's the person that was blocked. Follow the line up top. So let's go through these. All right. Angela Wagner blocked Frankie, Hannah Mae, and Hannah Hazel. Dana blocked Angela. You go, Dana. George Wagner blocked Frankie, Tabitha, Hannah Mae, and little Chris. Jake was friends with Frankie, little Chris, and Hannah Hazel. And that chills me to the bone because he killed all 3 of them, y'all. Now, they talk about Tabitha. She had multiple accounts. If you remember, there was a fake account made by Angela. She had some from before she was with George, and then she made some after, or made one after they broke up and she got out of there. But on one of her accounts, she had blocked little Chris. Dana had blocked Tabitha, and she was friends with Hannah Mae. So as far as the rodents, Frankie was blocked, as we know, by George and Angela. He was friends with Jake on there. Little Chris, blocked by George and Tabitha, friends with Jake. Dana was blocked by both Angela and Tabitha. And Hannah Mae blocked George. She was blocked by 2 of Angela's accounts and blocked by 2 of Tabitha's accounts, but they were friends on Tabitha's newest account. So if you remember, that was the source of all, kind of how the Wagners found out what Hannah Mae said. So Hannah Hazel, she was blocked by Angela, but she was friends with Jake and Tabitha. She looked at George and Jake's Facebook, their devices, Angela's Text Now account, which we've learned in that area. Sometimes people use texting services that you could connect to Wi-Fi, and Text Now you can. So they looked for just various things and came across some talk about the tattoos that the Wagners got after the murders. So there is a Text Now message. It's kind of hard to read on the screen, so I'm going to read it out here for you, of course, for you that aren't watching. This started on June the 8th, 2016, so just a little more than a month after the murders. Angela texts George, "Oh dear, you have an appointment tomorrow at noon for your tattoo, so you better be nice." George responds, "Me and waiting on Jake to get done." Him and somebody he didn't put in there. "Dad and I don't get ours until next week." Angela says, "Why?" George says, "That was our appointment, not today." Angela said, "Oh, okay. How long till he gets done?" And George says, "An hour probably." So we're jumping to June 9th, 2016. The next day, Angela said, "I know. How is Jake's tattoo coming?" Billy says, "Good." And Angela says, "I know." Billy says, wait. Angela said, "I know. How is Jake's tattoo coming?" Billy says, "Good." Angela says, "How much longer?" And Billy says, 2 hours. Angela says, "Wow, okay." So June 16th of 2016, Angela says, "Yes, Jake went to work this morning. What tattoo are you getting today?" Billy says, "They're working on George now." Angela says, "What are you getting today?" And he said, "I got to get the last 2. So they show photos of Jake's tattoos and the progression of that tattoo. The first picture on the screen here is August 13th, 2015, before the murders. And you see Jake has something on his shoulder. It's not clear really what it is from this vantage point. The second one was June the 9th, 2016. As you can see, it looks like some kind of tools. And then by November 10th, 2016, he's had that colored in. So then we get to George's tattoo, which has kind of been the source of a lot of chatter since the murders. On the shoulder, on his right shoulder, there is a picture taken May 5th of 2016, and he had a tattoo. It's not really visible in this picture. I tried to lighten it up, I just couldn't. But on June 16th, 2016, there's a skull with an 8-ball in the mouth that now covers that shoulder tattoo. You can say it has nothing to do with the murders, but at the same time, if you think about it, you think about how I mean, y'all, please go look at this picture on the link in the description. It is there's no way that was just something that he threw up there. Come on. So on Billy's right hand, it is the scorpion tattoo that was taken from the booking photo. Then they show a photo. It's not really a close up. You can't super see the tattoo, but this photo was taken October 3rd, 2016. He has his arm around Angela looking at her. And she said there were hardly any photos of Billy on anybody's devices or Facebook. So I don't think they really, liked Dad too much. There was no cross on that, by the way. And I think our girl Julia was like, phew. All right, last witness of the day, Rita Newcomb, Angela's mom, who was arrested in this case for forgery. It was dropped to a misdemeanor after she confessed, and obviously she's testifying for the prosecution. So her testimony is a lot more important than that one charge. She is 69 years old, married twice. She is a certified substitute teacher. She's been her first husband of 19 years. She left him due to domestic violence. She said he nearly beat her to death. And she was 17, by the way, when Angela was born. Angela and Billy were married when Angela was around 17 or 18, and they met at Flying W Farms. Rita did not like Billy and did not want Angela to marry Billy. And Angela wouldn't allow her to watch George and Jake at her house, but she was allowed to watch them at the Wagner house. She said when Angela was little, she called her Joe, which is her middle name, and Angela told Rita she was her whole world. But after Angela got married, things changed, and she said they just weren't as close as they normally were. And at this point, Rita was crying. She said there was jealousy between Angela and her younger brother, Chris, which you got a grown person jealous of a baby who has babies. Speaks to her mind. She liked Hannah Mae, saw her at holidays, and she knew that Jake and Hannah Mae were talking about custody issues before the murders. So Jake, Angela, and George told her about the murders. And later, Rita was told by BCI that the Wagners were suspects, but Jake and George said they didn't do it. And she said, they're my babies, and I believed them. Angela told her mom to tell authorities that she notarized the custody documents with Hannah Mae's forged signatures. She said she did it to protect Angela until God told her differently. Angela told her mom if she didn't sign the papers, Angela said they would hurt me bad or kill me. I don't know if that's just probably getting mom a little worried to do her dirty deeds. She said she loves her children and she would do anything for them, but she said she couldn't lose her soul over this, and she was crying again. She's been a notary since the late 80s, and she gave a handwriting sample, went to her attorney and said she was in trouble and didn't know what to do. So the attorney told her just to be truthful. And this was before Jake and Angela's confession, by the way. So she agreed to testify at the trial. She owned 50 acres of land and was going to build a house, but she had to sell that property to retain her attorney for this case. That's terrible. She said the 8 days she spent in jail were the worst of her life, and so she lives with her mom, who's 90. She is handed by the prosecution a handwriting sample by the state of a double power of attorney that's used to confirm her real signature. It was to Angela for her dad. Jake and George were witnesses on the document, which was legit. So on cross-exam, they were very gentle, apparently, with her. Parker says Angela put you in a bad position a lot of times. And he points out at one time, Angela allegedly stole her mom's horse named Gypsy. Parker asked about the domestic violence with her first husband, Ed. And she said he would beat and choke Angela as well. And she said Angela doesn't like to be told what to do. She also said Angela and Billy met through the horse business, and Angela was very fond of that big farm and the money. She said she loves Billy as a Christian woman. She said that Angela was assaulted while she was in the Air Force, and to Rita's knowledge, Angela only told her. So that wrapped up the week in this case. It seems to be going slow at times. It's gotten a little more interesting with hearing that border taping with Angela this week. Maybe next week we hear Jake's. We're getting to be a little late in the timeline for the prosecution. We're already up to where Rita confesses. And so they haven't covered the arrest or anything yet, though. So maybe they're just trying to do the Newcombs because they were all together. But I don't know, guys. They got to pick up the pace. And they've got to really start driving this home soon. It's not going to be long before the defense takes over. So anyways, yeah, so either tomorrow or Sunday, look for an update episode on the Cassie Carly case. There's some things in Harmony Montgomery, a filing in the Josh Duggar case, and a few others. Murdaugh, we got some stuff in there where Alec's attorney actually told the media today that his little buddy, Curtis Eddie Smith, failed a polygraph, which isn't admissible in court, but he's trying to either push a narrative out there or, I just want to know if Alec took one too and what his results were. You didn't share that. All right, guys. Hope you have a great weekend, and I'll see you when I see you.
Judy was boring.
Hello.
Then Judy discovered ChumbaCasino.com.
It's my little escape.
Now Judy's the life of the party.
Oh, baby, mama's bringing home the bacon.
Whoa, take it easy, Judy. The Chumba life is for everybody. So go to ChumbaCasino.com and play over 100 casino-style games. Join today and play for free for your chance to redeem some serious prizes. ChumbaCasino.com.
No purchase necessary. Void where prohibited by law. 18+ terms and conditions apply. See website for details. With no fees or minimums and no overdraft fees, banking with Capital One is the easiest decision in the history of decisions. Even easier than choosing to keep the Grinch away from the toy drive.
Who's going to deliver the toys to the kids?
What about me, the Grinch?
No.
Yep, even easier than that.
You steal the presents one time.
With no fees or minimums and no overdraft fees, is it even a decision? That's banking reimagined. What's in your wallet?
Terms apply. Capital One NA, member FDIC. Copyright Dr. Seuss Enterprises. Copyright Turner Entertainment Company.